morning. Welcome to Senate Commerce. This reminds me of church when everyone's visiting and having a great time, and then we got to get down to the business. So I hate to interrupt all the good conversation, but we do have a full agenda today. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Committee, you should have a hard copy of information that was asked for regarding Senate Bill 491 from Matt Willis. His follow-up with our questions and informational requests. So make sure that you look over that and let him know or me know if you have any additional questions or concerns about that. Also it's been a week and a half ago, we worked Senate Bill 493. At that time, Senator Holland inadvertently voted yes when his intent was to vote no. And so we are going to correct that today by making sure that Senator Holland is recorded as a no vote on 493, which was basically the plastic bag bill, okay? In committee, that would have then made the vote 4-4. And so we're to make sure that it doesn't change the outcome of that vote, I'm casting the decisive yes vote. So we're just making sure that Senator Holland is reflected as a no, and I'm a yes on that. So I want to draw the committee's attention to that. With that, I'm so excited to have our presentation today because it's been a topic that several of the committee members have asked about. I would like to know more about it. And I'm honored that we have today Stanley Adams, Director of Broadband, and he's going to give us an update on the Office of Broadband Development. Welcome to the committee.
Excuse me. Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chairman and members of the committee. I am Stanley Adams, Director of the Office of Broadband Development for another day or so, but appreciate the opportunity to come and visit with you and just mention that I'm handing the baton over to another Stanley, Melinda Stanley, who will, you'll be at broadband in Kansas will be in capable hands. So thank you again for letting me have the opportunity to visit with you today. So the past year has been a busy one, and expanding broadband connectivity has never been more important than now, as we have all gone through the pandemic experience. Today, I'd like to share with you an overview of the recent efforts undertaken by the Office of Broadband Development to leverage federal funding and improve internet access for all Kansans. Excuse me. In 2020, the Federal CARES Act, Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security, was enacted, and the Strengthening People and Revitalizing Kansas, or the SPARK Committee, was created. The SPARK Committee allocated a total of $60 million from that fund for what would become two broadband grant programs related to the pandemic response that I can review with you real briefly here today. First, the $50 million Connectivity Emergency Response Grant program was established. This program facilitated infrastructure deployments across the state. We encouraged local communities and internet service providers to work together in proposing projects where there was demonstrated need. The grants were competitive and featured a 20% matching contribution requirement. And there were a total of 65 projects that were funded across the state. These projects included both fiber and fixed wireless connectivity solutions. The program was established on a very aggressive timeline. All involved will know that that's probably an understatement. It was a very aggressive timeline to get things moving. The CARES Act legislation required the funds be expended by December 30 of that year, 2020. Ultimately, Congress extended that deadline for project completion. There were supply chain delays and poor weather contributed to the need for extensions in a handful of our projects, but this was a nationwide issue. The internet service provider community is, to me, again, commended for going above and beyond the call in getting this critical work completed. And if you have the printed version, I've inserted a map of the state where all of the projects were. You can see there's a large number of projects, and they were all across the state. And then the second program was the second one we established was the $10 million broadband partnership adoption grant program. It was established to facilitate internet access for low-income households. This program defrayed internet subscription costs, funded hotspots, and provided devices to eligible households through December 30 of 2020 per the CARES Act requirement. And there were 25 awards under that program. Mostly those awards were to internet service providers and school districts. We worked primarily with the internet service providers and local school districts as they were in the best position to quickly identify eligible households and effectively target resources. And again, you can see a map of where those projects are in my handout. So those were the two federally funded programs that we have executed or implemented to date in the office. And I wanted to just briefly tell you about a state-funded program that we had as well. So kind of on dual timing, but actually we were on track to do the state-funded program before the pandemic hit, but then the pandemic did hit. So we juggled things, as you'll see why we did that here. So I wanted to highlight that. We launched the program in 2020. This program, the state-funded program, to $85 million over 10 years towards bridging the digital divide, thanks to funding provided through KDOT's Eisenhower Legacy Transportation Program. And that program was created as a direct result of broadband modernization funding provided through swift bipartisan action in the 2020 legislative session. Now, under this program, there was $5 million a year for the first 3 years is available for grants available for grant opportunities, and that's followed by 7 years at $10 million a year. And this is the first, I want to mention, this is the first state-funded broadband infrastructure grant program. The maximum amount under this program for a grant is $1 million, and there is a 50% matching contribution component, meaning we're able to support projects costing up to $2 million in total to improve connectivity. The application process for the acceleration grant program is competitive and requires applicants to provide a map of proposed funding service areas to ensure the funding is going where it's needed. The process also includes a public comment process, in which we publish the map of the proposed funding service area so that if there is a question as to whether or not that area has service, the issue can be identified prior to making grant awards. And this is a part of our effort to make sure we're putting funding where it needs to go, where there's a demonstrated need. The year one projects are nearly completed. There were 14 awardees. 12 of those, each of those awardees have a total of 12 months to complete the projects. And again, you can see the 14 projects awarded there on the state map that I have in my prepared text. We're currently in the midst, we were currently in the midst of taking applications. We've now received all of the applications for year 2 of this 10-year program. As part of our process, we asked prospective applicants to give us a letter of intent. Those letters of intent were not mandatory, but they help us manage our workflow and prepare for the evaluation process. And we received 50 letters of intent and with projected funding requests totaling $25 million. That's far in excess of the available $5 million that we have for the round. Applications for the second round were received as of, I think, 2 weeks ago, and we are now going through the process of evaluating them. And there's a process of, there's a technical evaluation, and there's also a qualitative evaluation to make sure we're dealing with, to make sure we have a good understanding of where the funding is going to go. And we also have, I mentioned before, the public comment period that is currently active. So these projects are on our website, and we are taking public comments if there are any. So those are highlights of the 3 programs, 2 federally funded, 1 state funded, that we have stood up. And in the appendix I provide, you'll see a list of the awardees, the award amounts, and details of the 3 programs. Now, lastly, I wanted to briefly discuss the federal funds available for broadband. So that's kind of where we've been, and there's a lot more to come. There's significant federal funding in the pipeline for expanding broadband nationwide. This includes funding from the state Fiscal Recovery Fund, currently being discussed in the Spark Committee, And I've been served as the vice chair on that connectivity advisory panel, which Melinda will be taking my place going forward. Lots of good progress there. In addition to the Spark funds, there are also funds available through federally administered programs. The Office of Broadband Development submitted an application to the NTIA, the National Information Telecommunications Administration. They have a program that was called the Broadband Infrastructure Program. It's a highly competitive program. For nationwide, the funding opportunity was only $300 million. It's a lot of money, but when you divide it up proportionately, it ends up not being so. And made possible through this was a Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021, where that funding came away from. States and individuals, both were, individual entities, I should say, were eligible to apply for this program. We requested and received project proposals from across the state. Our application included partnerships with 7 internet service providers from across the state and requested grants totaling $13.4 million for a total of 10 projects. Award decisions are no longer pending. We just found out from the NTIA last week that unfortunately the state of Kansas did not get an approval for funding that we had submitted for. And I'll just say it wasn't a real shock because, as I mentioned, it was extremely competitive. Only a handful of awards were going to be made nationwide, but we submitted a competitive application. And the good news, if you will, is those applications were not for naught. We will be able to, in future, still take those those applications under consideration under the forthcoming funding opportunities. So, and we encouraged applicants. We made sure folks understood that this would not be a wasted effort. We knew it was highly competitive. We made sure people knew about it, and to know that if we're not successful in the next round, there's other opportunities that will be much more favorable to being successful. So that was the broadband infrastructure program from the NTIA. Now, there's also funding available through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which features the IIJA, which features a $42 billion allocation, which will be directed to states. The lion's share of the funding is going to be in a program called the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Fund. The formulation and details for how this will flow to the states is still being worked out. As of yesterday, we were on a conference call to get the update, and they've not determined they've not made available to us what the formulation is going to be. But I'm very optimistic this will represent a significant investment opportunity to help Kansas close the digital divide so that all Kansas communities have robust access and able to fully participate in the ever-growing digital economy. So in essence, I think the takeaway is that there is a large investment opportunity coming over the next few months, as you may have heard in the press, and the state is well-positioned to take advantage of that and close the digital divide. So that's the highlights, and you see, again, I mentioned the list of the projects awarded are in the appendix.
Thank you so much. At this time, committee, we will open it up for questions. Senator Dahl.
Thank you, Madam Chair. More of an observation than a question. And I know that good luck in your future endeavors. But all these little marks here, I'll spell on this page. I'm going to have 12 counties. I have 10 counties now. I have 2 marks from the same county. I represent as many people as these people do. So when we're doing future projects, I hope the 39th Senate District gets more consideration than we have in the past.
The good news, if you will, is the projects that we've had so far, they were dependent on the communities coming to us and applying for the funds, and then it being I've demonstrated need, obviously. And
throwing them under the bus, huh?
No, I'm not actually. No, it's that competitive point, really. There's a limited number, and what we tried to do is have a process where we could evaluate the demonstrated need was a big factor, but it is a big factor. One of the things that we're really trying to do more of, especially now that the funding is increasing, the available funding increases, is to make sure most of what we've done has been on a hurry up timing. And now we're doing the outreach to make sure all those communities are aware. And usually the service provider community is where they're paying attention and have most likely are going to be able to help identify opportunities in communities. So the good news, as I say, if you will, is that going forward, I think you'll see those dots start to fill in.
Senator Dietrich, then Senator Tyson.
Thank you, and thank you for being here. That was kind of my question. I was just noting then in your maps that there was that whole section of western Kansas, about 16 counties closest to the Colorado border that just didn't have any marks on them. And so your thought is it was because they didn't reach out to make the application?
Combination, that is true. And there's a difficult reality when as you go to sparser and sparser populated areas. The fundamental issue is service providers need to have a business case to go there, right? And what we're doing is the programs we've talked about, except for the partnership adoption grant, that was about adoption and subscription service. But the infrastructure is what we focused on all of these projects. And the grants that we provide are to support the infrastructure being deployed. But that still leaves the operating costs that someone's got to bear, right? And that's the service providers. So what happens, the sparser the community, the more difficult it is to make the case for this private sector to make the case to go, even when we fund 50% or more of the infrastructure.
May I ask a follow-up question?
Certainly.
One quick follow-up question. So what happens what's the process when you have a provider who, as many of us hear from our constituents, is not performing at the level that you would want them to? Who do they contact if they can't get through to that provider? And that's one of the issues.
I've been on the receiving end of a few of those calls.
You're leaving. Is it Melinda?
Yeah, we both made the mistake of having our phone number and email on our website. So we can't hide. And we try to help. What we typically do when we hear about those types of issues, we try to facilitate the conversation with the service provider if we think that's what's going on. But typically, it's the question is how do they get their community engaged to take advantage of some of the funding opportunities that we have, and we always encourage local communities to kind of be thinking, what are your needs? How do you identify them and be prepared to put an application in? Reach out to your service providers proactively. And kind of get their support so that when the funding applications open, they're ready.
Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you for your presentation. I got to tell you, I had hope because they've been studying broadband in the rural areas for probably over 30 years now, hundreds of millions of dollars. And when they said that they were going to the industry to put out these grants, I had hope. But I do have some concerns that were raised by the good senator to my left. I would like to see your process in deciding where the funds went. And I understand that you had $5 million available and $25 million asked for. But there is that demand. There's even a higher demand. So I'm hoping that the Spark money and the federal money and all of that is being spent wisely and that we can see results. We're hearing from constituents frequently as to this being a major concern.
Agreed.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Senator Dahl.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to follow up, it was my thought, how I guess I felt these things were distributed. I thought free enterprise took care of places where they could make money where there was population. So because I understand out where it's sparsely, your lines are longer before you have connections, that sort of thing. Within cities, metropolitan areas, they have enough connections in a small group. I don't understand why they're getting the money and we're not, because this was supposed to, the way I understood the subsidizing was supposed to subsidize areas that needed subsidized, not where businesses can make money. Now, am I seeing something wrong here?
I wouldn't ever say you're seeing something wrong, sir. You're right about the conceptual framework. The conceptual framework is that in fact, we were very diligent about making sure wherever our funding went, it was where there was not service or availability. The infrastructure was not present. And we work with the service provider community, and I think it's fair to say they pay attention, and they look to make sure that we're not doing a project where they have service. That would be the threshold trigger for us to make sure that we're going where it needs to go. Now, that's not to say that we only go to Western Kansas or we only go to Northwest Kansas or any specific area, because there are needs, and you might be surprised, there are areas closer to the population centers where on the fringe, there's connectivity issues. I hear from the wide range, but from a physical infrastructure standpoint, it's mostly in those very, very sparsely populated areas. And then it's a question of limited funds, so we can't fund all of them at one time.
Can I follow up, please? I understand that, the sparsely populated areas. 'Cause there again, I represent 70-some thousand people, and we were looking at areas that are not served well with broadband. Being from that area, I can tell you that broadband's weak out there. It's a very, especially with COVID coming and remote learning and all that, it became a serious problem. I'm still not buying why Western Kansas doesn't have more marks on the map. So I just, but it's all good. I mean,
I follow you.
Senator Stephan.
Thank you. How do you define having service? Does it mean you're totally dark on internet access, or you don't have a direct fiber optic connection, or how do you define it? Because there's multiple ways to provide internet access. Kind of in dovetailing with these folks, right in front of my house, I have plenty good internet access. And I live out in rural Reno County, but here they are with a subsidized program bearing fiber optic right in front of my house when I already have good internet access. So is there hiccups in your evaluation process?
No, probably not the issue there. The definition of broadband is the subject of a lot of conversations, and there are a lot of different definitions. And what we do is we abide by the funding typically comes with strings attached. They provide the guidelines for what's eligible, what's not eligible, how we can use the money, how we can deploy the resources. The starting point is, what is the definition of broadband? And what we do is we follow the guidelines that we get from the funding source is what it really ends up being. So we don't actually try to make the judgment calls. We aren't able to make the judgment calls in that regard.
Thank you. Well, fair enough. And I do believe clearly that there are different definitions, because this was clearly a subsidized program in an area that already had existing internet service, and not. We didn't have hard fiber, but we had radar, or whatever you want to call it.
The
towers,
fixed wireless.
Yeah. Yeah, and frequently there's areas in Reno County that have competition, and one of those is subsidized and one of them is not subsidized. So there's some major overlaps and discrepancies in definitions in this program, and obviously there's a lot of money available.
If you let us know where an area that you think that we may have done that, we'd certainly take a look.
Okay, seeing no other questions, I do have a quick question. So where are we as a state? Is there like a metric that says, okay, before we started, expanding in the process, we were at, as a state, 20% covered with broadband. And now through this process, we've invested X amount of money, and now we can say we're up to 50%. I mean, do we know how much this has really helped expand access?
Well, it's, to be honest, it's one household at a time is what it really is. I think to quantify the percentage, the definition of broadband is a tricky subject, and the percentage of coverage is a tricky subject because it depends on what data source you use. We typically go by the FCC's definition. Over time, the lion's share of investments has come through high-cost programs that the FCC has. And they do an annual report that identifies what percentage of a state has coverage by their definition, or a particular a couple of different definitions, actually. And they even break it out between, for the state in total, for urban and non-urban. And I don't remember the percentages off the top of my head, but we do try to track that. My caution is it's a data source to kind of look at where the trend is going, and it's definitely going in the right direction. I'm not even, without doubt, we're moving in the right direction. How much is left is hard to say because it's a moving target.
I appreciate that. It's just, when we hear, especially to Senator Dahl's point about when schools closed down, we had to go to remote learning, and then all of a sudden it's like we can't because we don't have access. And so, it would be helpful to know how much we're progressing on that for some of those reasons. When we say, we need to expand broadband access, and I understand what you're saying, it just would be helpful as we're having those conversations to have a clear parameters around those. So I appreciate that. Any other questions? Senator Steffen.
Just to build off that, what we need is very, very clear definitions of what internet access and availability is. That needs to be clearly defined and not debated.
Okay, with that, Director Adams, thank you for your service. Thank you for being here today. Best of luck on your future endeavors. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you all.
Okay, committee, we will have an updated agenda being sent out. We will now have a hearing on Senate Bill 361 on Tuesday. So we will get that updated agenda out to you today. And with that, seeing no other business, we are adjourned. Thank you.